Hi, Dr. P here, and I'm going to talk about something that's kind of esoteric in game design, what I've seen called thresholds. A threshold is a point at which players understand how mechanics work in a game, how a particular mechanic works. Up to that point, they don't know what happens with the underlying mechanisms. They just know what comes out. In other words, it's a black box. Now, there's certainly a place for black boxes in games, especially video games, where you're much more likely to have black boxes because the programming can take care of it, and the players don't have rules to worry about. In fact, in a tabletop game, it's much harder to have a black box because the players have to understand the rules. Now, I don't like the idea of thresholds in games. Ask yourself, is the game about figuring out and taking advantage of the system, or about playing better than the opponent or opponents strategically and tactically and perhaps diplomatically if there's more than two sides? Well, I'm very much in favor of the latter. The former, in its extreme, is a puzzle, where the puzzle is a system and you have to figure out a solution to that system. Games are not about figuring out solutions to systems. There are certainly good ways to play and poor ways to play, but in the end, you always have to have the input of players or of something that's trying to be a semblance of a player. This is why cooperative games, tabletop games, almost always come down to puzzles in the end. Some of them, the puzzle is pretty hidden, some of them not, because there's a predictable system at work and you can figure out the system and the system will continue to work the same way, whereas a human, if they observed that they had been figured out, would change how they played. Theoretically, you could write a computer program that would do the same thing, but when you only have the resources of a tabletop game where you're using cards or dice or something else to provide the opposition, then it's not going to be able to be sophisticated enough to recognize that you figured it out and change how it plays. Now, the designer can recognize you're going to figure it out and then change how the game plays by adding additional cards or changing the tables or doing something else so that the game plays differently. But that's something the designer has to do. The opponent cannot do that, not in a tabletop game. So I guess you could say I'm against thresholds, and I'll leave you with that. Thanks for listening.